fun. As ever, our workshops are not just fun and festive, but highly informative, and we have top-notch expertise here. Where better to hold this particular event, which I think is the first. It's the first Hotel Chocolat, isn't it? Yeah. You haven't run one before, have you? This is Ollie from Union Coffee, Marisa from Hotel Chocolat, and Claire Haddad from Hotel Chocolat, who's our go-to chocolate expert, and a patissier too. However, this is the first, which is great. It was born of an idea mooted by Sarah Jane Staines, OBE, who is of course chair of the Academy of Chocolate and a long-standing member of the Guild, and Richard Ehrlich, who of course is chair of the Guild, was chair of the Guild at the time of the conversation. And I mean, it's a very obvious parallel, this extraordinary process of gathering beans from cacao plants or from coffee plants, and then doing something really with them, roasting them to bring out their flavours. And not just that, but actually they have to be fermented first for those flavours to happen. I mean, it's crazy, it's great. You know, how did it all happen? I mean, nobody really knows how the very first cacao, in fact it was a drink, of course, how the very first cacao came to be enjoyed as opposed to just reviled as something fairly horrible beyond that wonderful pulp on the outside. I mean, maybe it was, you know, pre-digested by some animal. We simply don't really know. Perhaps we know a bit more about how coffee came to be. I don't know, maybe Ollie can answer that historical point. Hi, getting people to come. Hello. It's just me doing a bit of a free spiel, so I'll come down, let you down. Finish right. You all know Hotel Chocolat, I'm sure. It's its 10th birthday this year. It seems extraordinary. It started from a little shop in Watford, I believe. Bang on Watford, not north or south, and has grown phenomenally since. The vision of, well, two guys, but the man I know best, I guess, from his participation in the Academy of Chocolate is Angus Thirlwell. Angus, probably most of you know or have seen him or met him, has always seemed to me to be a kind of young version of Richard Branson. I mean, he's definitely the Richard Branson of the chocolate world, and he seems to never stop innovating. He's now, that's been a long-standing dream from his childhood. I don't know if he had that dream in childhood. He grew up in the West Indies. It was a long-standing dream to have a cacao plantation, and he has got a cacao plantation in St. Lucia. And he's brought what he can of it to the people here. And we have conch and roast and conch, that's it, isn't it? Roast and conch centres just down the road, and you can actually see beans being roasted and conched and made into chocolate. It's extraordinary. And here we have a school of chocolate that was founded just this year, 2040, it was just this year. Amazing. I think Angus has probably done more than almost anyone to teach people about what chocolate is and what it can be, way beyond confectionery. I'm talking too long. I'm just intrigued to see what parallels we'll find, not just between the process of fermentation and roasting, and in some cases conching, and certainly infusing, and whatever, and the production of the two types of bean, but actually the parallels in flavour. Will it be similar flavour notes that work best? Will it be diametric opposites? And I know that we have both. And the team here, Claire and Marisa, they've all been working very hard to think, oh my, it might be really intriguing, it might work very well. Right, I'm going to stop now. Claire, you're kicking off, aren't you?
Yes.
So this is Claire Haddad, top chocolatier. You can tell everyone how long you've been at Hotel Chocolat. You're a patissier before that?
Yes.
So anyway, off we go.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to Cocoa Box. So this is our School of Chocolate. I'm going to sort of wander back and forth. This is one of the biggest events we've done in this space, so you'll have to excuse me, but I will try and walk around and point my face in everyone's direction at some point in the evening. So yes, this is our new site. We opened this year and we're running Bean to Bar events. Our lovely team here, Aaron and Bethany. So Bethany is our event chocolatier, so if any of you get the chance to come and experience one of our events, she'll be hosting it. We actually get people to make chocolate from scratch from Bean to Bar on site here. And Aaron hosts some tasting adventures where you get to taste chocolates, as well as helping do all the bookings and bring people into the space for us. So they'll be here tonight handing chocolate and coffee around to everybody, but they are both have a lot of chocolate knowledge in themselves, so if you have any questions that you can't quite get to me, please feel free to ask them as they walk around. Aaron's looking terrified now. As Stephen mentioned, all the coffees today, we're doing coffee and chocolate pairing, so we're going to start from scratch. So we're going to look at the coffee and cocoa and where they come from, really get to taste everything in all of its stages, and then we're going to do 4 pairings. And we thought, because we've got some really good food experts here, we've got a few challenging pairings, so hopefully some things that are going to push you guys a bit tonight. We've got a few things on the table, just a bit of housekeeping. If you need the toilet, it's just at the back. The guys here, if you want any water or anything popping up, just feel free to ask them. And on your tables you've got a tasting tree just to help you as you do your tastings to pick out any flavour notes. You've also got a piece of paper just so that you can write some of your tasting notes on as you go through. And then on the table you've also got water and some bread, just as some palate cleansers as you're going through, because as you know, coffee and chocolate both have quite strong flavours, so as we go through each pairing, just try and cleanse your mouth with a bit of bread and water just to make sure you're getting the full flavours coming from those coffee and chocolates as we go through. So, yes, all the coffees today have been provided by Union. So we've got Ollie and Ashley, who have been painstakingly making your coffees today. It's amazing watching them. One of my favourite things about putting this event together is I think for the first time we have been matched with people who are as geeky as we are. So we really at Hotel Chocolat are known for being chocolate geeks, so we really get a bit nerdy with roasting temperatures and times, but the brilliance is coffee and Union particularly are exactly the same. So I'm going to try and field the coffee questions as we go, but anything too tricky, Ollie is your man to go to. He's an expert, works for Union. So, if you have any difficult questions you want to think up, please feel free to think them up, but towards Ollie. And any cocoa questions, as I say, to me or any of the team here, we should be able to talk you through. So the event today, we're basically going to start off looking at the similarities between cocoa and coffee and why they sort of pair together. That's one of your coffees being made, so they really are being ground down fresh as we go through. So we're going to start off we're going to taste right from the fruit, then the beans, which you have on your table, and look at how those first flavours, influences of flavour, and how they sort of end up in the beans to begin with. And then we're going to move on and do our pairings, and we're going to go right the way from white chocolate, we're going to taste all the way to 100%, and with the coffee beans, we've got some really interesting different methods of production to really pick out the different flavours and different origins as we go through. So we're going to hopefully get a good overview of the whole cocoa and coffee together. So first of all, chocolate and coffee really is a bit of a joy to pair together. So I'm sure some of you have been to maybe slightly more experimental pairings with different food groups. Coffee and chocolate really are a dream to pair together. With the first meetings I had with Ollie, we almost both went into it with, I'd sort of suggested some chocolates we'd quite like to use and read up a bit about their coffees, and our way of thinking was very much in line straight from the beginning, because they simply are so nice to pair together. One of the reasons for this is because of the regions that they grow in are very, very similar. So the band where cocoa and coffee grow is pretty much identical. So cocoa growing coffees and cocoa growing and coffee growing countries are very much in line with each other, and they tend to be 20 degrees either side of the equator, very humid areas with high rainfall and rainforesty areas, generally the type of places that you just want to go on holiday to. I always just think of my ideal holiday location, and then I can imagine the cocoa and coffee growing there. So for example, we have a plantation in St. Lucia, so basically just imagine St. Lucia, and that's where you get your cocoa and coffee growing. One of the reasons that we have decided that we work together with Union, we use their coffees in some of our cafe sites, but we both have very similar roots in that we both like to work as directly with farmers as possible. So first of all, one of the reasons for this is because it means that we encourage farmers to carry on growing the cocoa and coffee. So ideally we cut out all those middlemen and we can pay the farmers a fairer price. So obviously, ethically, that's a good way to operate. But secondly, it means that for both of us, we get a bit more control over the flavours that are coming in. We can really get those really high quality cocos and coffees. So Union particularly work very closely with cooperatives and farmers. As we do with our farmers, we try and go out and visit plantations before we use the cocoa and try and find out a bit more about the methods. And that means we can help train the farmers in improving their methods, and Union work in very much the same way. If they find a farm they want to work with, we can work with farmers to improve their methods and really get the most out of the beans that we're using. So the first thing we're going to taste today, just to get everyone warmed up, is we're going to taste, one of the first things to remember is both coffee and cocoa originate from fruit. And I think it's very easy to forget when you're having your morning cup of coffee and sort of treat of a bar of chocolate, that both of them actually originate from a fruit. So the first thing that we're going to actually taste is the fruit of both of the cocoa and the coffee. So first of all, coming around now is the cocoa pod. So just a bit of background on this. So our cocoa pods, I'm going to grab one here, obviously. If you look at the, there's a piece of paper on your table that just has a small image of a split open cocoa pod. So these are our cocoa pods, and when they are ripe, they're cut open, and inside they have the fruit, which is the cocoa pulp, which you're about to taste, and that's the sort of white covering on the beans. Now, normally this is used up in fermentation, which we'll cover in a bit, but we've actually managed to source some for you guys to try today. So this is actually the fruit from the cocoa bean, and this is what all the little animals in the forest are trying to get their hands on. And this is sort of, as Sylvia was mentioning, about how did we get to the point of cocoa and coffee. We can imagine this is what originally people were eating from the cocoa plant and the beans. Thank you very much.
Has it been frozen or is it?
It's been in the fridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we get it.
Fluffy.
Is it?
When it's on a cocoa, in a cocoa pod, it's like more fluffy.
Yeah, so this is being removed, and we buy it in, it's frozen. We use it in lots of different cocktails.
Yeah.
So for me, this really just tastes like lychees that have almost been squeezed with lime juice over them. You get the really citric lime flavour coming through towards the end, and really those sort of delicate floral lychee flavours. And then the second thing we're going to try, by way of comparison, is actually something that I've only first experienced a few weeks ago, which is cascara, or the dried coffee cherries. So the coffees come from a cherry, and during the process, this is Los Lajones that we're actually going to try right the way from fruit all the way to finished drink. And in this process, the cherries on the outside of the coffee, during the process, have been dried out and then have been kept after hulling, and then we've actually brewed it into a tea. So you get those really amazing flavours coming through, and I believe this is a new product for Union. And it is really amazing to taste, and I think it really does hone in on the fact that these things originate from fruits. So so it's coffee cherry tea basically. So all we've done is we've basically taken the hulled dried coffee cherries and then brewed them as you would like a tea. And then this has just been served chilled just so you get the flavour notes. But this one They do vary from fruit to fruit, the flavour notes that you get out of them. But this one, we get very like tamarind, sort of red apple notes coming through. What do you guys think of this one? When we're growing our coffee and our cocoa, they both start off in these fruits, but obviously they go on a long journey after that. Another similarity between the two is that they're both, once they've been picked, it's very important for both of them to be picked when they're ripe, because the sugar in the fruit really impacts on the flavour of your end product. So, especially with the Los Cajones, the process it uses really depends on the cherries being really ripe. And for us with the cocoa, if you don't have the right level of sugar, you're never going to achieve the level of fermentation that you want. So it really is another reason why working with the farmers is so important, because we need to make sure that they're skilled enough to recognise the perfectly ripe pods. And
Purely through ripening.
the sugar development, yeah. So just as when you have your fruit at home, the flavour just changes so much depending on how ripe that fruit is. And because, you know, whenever you're tasting your coffee and chocolate, if you always start back at that point that they come from fruits, everything from then seems so much more natural, the different flavours that you're getting out of them, just like, you know, wine comes from a fruit, from grapes, all those different flavours that you're getting out all of a sudden make a lot more sense than if you're looking at it as the finished product. So the starting point of a fruit is really, really important to remember. So both of them go through this fermentation process. Now with coffee, there's a few different ways in which that's done, and that's their sort of first point of distinguishing as to how they're going to process the coffee. Whereas with chocolate, it's a little bit, I mean, there are differences from region to region, but generally there's a bit more of a uniform process whereby we leave the pulp on the pods, and the natural sugar inside that pulp that you taste, if you see it's quite sweet, that provides the sugar for the fermentation. And really that's a very crucial stage for cocoa, because up until that point the beans actually hold none of the flavours. So if we were to try and make chocolate out of the beans before they've been fermented, we'd get none of those cocoa-y flavours coming through. With coffee, however, it's slightly different. There's a few different types of fermentation. So one of the coffees we're going to taste later, we'll talk a bit more in detail then, but it effectively has very minimal fermentation, whereas others have slightly more, maybe 2-day fermentations to develop if they're grown at slightly lower altitudes, the sugar levels might be more important to make sure that you get the good body and the flavour of the coffee at the end. But I think with coffee you could make a drink that resembled coffee without the fermentation, whereas for cocoa it's much more crucial in the process. Is that correct, Ollie? Yeah? Lovely. Just checking. I've been trying to learn for you guys about coffee. It's been absolutely amazing, actually. A chance to learn all about this other geeky world and get engrossed in it. So the fermentation, yeah, is very important for both of them. And then after that, they're both dried out. And as I say, both of them come from these farming landscapes, and often the sun is the best method used for the drying. So traditionally both of them are just laid out, dried in the sun. And again, with cocoa and with coffee, they're very susceptible in these early stages to picking up flavours. So they're really important as they're carried out on the farms. They're susceptible to picking up sort of unwanted characteristics during these stages. With cocoa, we say during the fermentation and drying, you get about 70% of your flavour determined at that point. So obviously as a chocolatier, you still have a lot of control over which flavours you decide to pick out and influence. But really you can't make good chocolate with bad beans. And the same with coffee. Really you've locked in the flavours as the region that they've been growing in starts to determine those flavours. And then the processes that they go through on the farm are going to just sort of lock those flavours in, and there's really nothing that we can do to mask those. So today, all the coffees that we're going to be drinking black and filtered. So really there is no mask for Union to hide behind. They're laying themselves bare, so all the flavours of the coffee are there for you guys to taste. And the same with our chocolates. We're tasting all the way up to 100%. So no sugar there to mask it, and lots of origins where there's, you know, the flavours of the cocoa is really going to come through for you guys to taste.
I don't want to hold anything up, but I was just wondering at this point how the history of the discovery of the two drinks, they were initially drinks and then drink and then food, if you like, compare. I mean, when did people first, I know it's a matter also when it came to Europe and what region it started, you know, they started appreciating chocolate and so on, and Mesoamerican and so on for chocolate. But how, is there parallels? Are there historical parallels? Have you looked into that?
I think both of them were sort of discovered and brought across to Europe at similar times, but the coffee history is in African, very much African roots.
The cradle of coffee is very much Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the home of coffee. And there are many different sort of legends about how it developed. But whether it be Kaldi, the goat herder, who found his goats were sort of particularly, jumpy when they were eating a specific fruit, and he sort of went to that tree that was producing the fruit and found that, wow, this cherry has an interesting flavour, and yes, it does give me this sort of intense feeling. And whether you go by that legend or whether you go perhaps by the more realistic concept of Ethiopians eating it as a power food, and it's just something that developed over eons, and it has been sort of consumed in Ethiopia for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and no one really knows where that history comes because it's so old.
Yeah.
And in Ethiopia today, still you are getting these amazing heirloom varieties, which people don't know about, and they're just coming to, and it just shows that it's been in Ethiopia for hundreds of years.
Can I say something? Since we're talking about Ethiopia, they still have a wonderful coffee ceremony in
Yes.
Ethiopia, as you know.
Yes, absolutely.
You go into a house, particularly if you are in the highlands, and they spread a particular kind of grass, and then they roast the coffee in front of you, with very primitive conditions and implements.
Yes.
And then they grind it, and then they make the coffee and they serve it to you, which is a wonderful thing.
I've not had the honour of being invited to a
I've had
coffee
it a
ceremony,
few
but my
times.
boss has. He's been, and they say if you're served the third cup, then you're a very special guest. So yeah.
It's a wonderful tradition.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
And then cocoa's roots are South America, so sort of opposite sides. But both were sort of discovered at the same time, really through colonialism, and when Europe spread across the rest of the world and basically found all these precious treats and brought them back over to Europe with them.
We want what they've got.
Yes, exactly.
That sort of thing. And
Yeah.
the Europeans, in a sense, developed it into a kind of level of finesse, or is that unfair? Is that
well.
believe that, if you like.
I mean, I don't know. I think the French were doing some pretty interesting. They sort of first started it as a very, very milky drink, so they weren't doing it in its purest form. But I know it sort of came to France initially, and that's where it became very trendy. And then originally, actually, the Londoners the British were drinking coffee originally. That's where a lot of the coffee houses come from. But yeah, I don't know how refined it was. I think the Italians were the ones who really sort of
Went back to the black coffee.
worked the art and the espresso machine specifically.
And one of the things that myself and Ollie have been talking about is how obviously we've got this big culture of eating chocolate and coffee for the last 100 years, but it's only really been over the last sort of 10-15 years that people have got into the more artisanal side of coffee and cocoa drinking. So the origins of coffee, rather than just having your sort of cup of coffee in the morning you don't really think about, you just have it as a boost. And the same with chocolate, people are really starting to eat it and appreciate the different origins. So even though when they both came into Europe, especially chocolate was very much tailored to meet European taste, so adding lots of sugar into it and sweetening it with milk, same as inventing these drinks with cappuccinos and lattes, adding lots of milk into them and very milky bars of chocolates to meet those European tastes. Whereas over the last sort of 10-15 years, people have really started to appreciate the roots of where the cocoa and coffee have come from, and started going back into drinking these single origins, and really starting to appreciate those flavour notes. So hopefully,
Can I ask, is the caffeine, is it in the pulp and the bean, or just throughout the...
Yeah, I mean, the caffeine's in the leaf, it's in the cherry, it's in the bean, And it's the tree's natural defense mechanism against bugs. And the higher altitude you go, the less caffeine there is, because there are less bugs. The lower altitude you go, the more caffeine, which is why Robusta coffee, grown at much lower levels, has very high caffeine content, and why Arabica at the much higher altitudes has less caffeine.
It's worth acknowledging the fact that coffee and tea and chocolate, all of them in the first instance, gained their popularity from the fact that in great intensity they were highly intoxicating, even hallucinogenic.
Yeah.
And when they came to England, coffee was drunk in such a concentration that or to Germany, was drunk in such a concentration that Bach wrote his coffee cantata about the wickedness of the way in which it was used.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean the Sufis, you know, in sort of the Yemeni part of the world, I think the Sufis were famous for using the coffee to sort of keep themselves going all night. And in the UK, it was really what broke, I think, the national drink was beer. You know, I think, you know, everyone, you know, because they couldn't drink water, so it was a lot of the cases beer. And people found, or they say, that coffee was responsible for the Industrial Revolution, because it meant that people were sort of now on this clean, you know, not so drunk, they're on this clean sort of, you know, invigorating drink. I don't know how much truth that is, but
it helped.
Yeah, I guess it would have, yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, it's an interesting similarity because with the Sufis, because the Mayan warriors went to battle with bags of cocoa beans and could march for a whole day just eating cocoa.
Yeah.
So you know that kind of that similarity between coffee is quite.
Yeah.
Coffee with cocoa is really interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things we're going to taste the beans in a minute, and it's really interesting. They both have quite similar characteristics, and they're both natural stimulants, so they have those properties that make them appealing in the first place. But they're both also very high in antioxidants, so they're both naturally very good source of antioxidants, which is often overlooked in both the coffee and the cocoa. So that seems like a good. Yeah. So. The fermentation and drying sort of happen on site, and then as they come over here, the roasting is the next stage in both coffee and cocoa making. Now, as I sort of point out, with the cocoa, the fermentation is one of the most crucial steps. Roasting with the cocoa is very important to bring out the intricacies of the flavour, but with coffee, up until it's roasted, you really can't detect any of the coffee flavours on there. So, just to sort of prove the point, we've got some green coffee beans on the table, and if you'd like to smell them, you'll see that there's absolutely sort of none of those coffee aromas come through. This is the stage which you really get these sort of very geeky, naturally people attracted to the cocoa and the coffee, because this is the stage where you can really influence the flavour. So we have the same coffee beans in the middle there. They're the exact same variety, but they've now been roasted, and if you'd like to smell and if you'd like to taste them, you're more than welcome. Again, these are the Los Sajones, which is the same Cascara tea that you drank. So these are the beans from the same farm that have been roasted. And you can see how much flavour really develops from that roasting. And again, this is where the sort of the master roasters of the coffee world really come into their own. They can determine whether they temperature and whether they take it to first crack or second crack, and that's when they can really start to influence the flavours that you're going to taste in the coffees today. Most of the coffees that, well, I think all of the coffees that we're going to taste today, because of their single origin nature, most of them have a very light roast, rather than some of the coffees that you would get on bigger end scales that have a much higher roast. And it's the same with our cocoa. We use a much lower roast than you would find in other chocolates. So if I'd like to get you guys to taste the cocoa bean.
Would you like to explain first crack and second crack?
Ollie?
Yeah, okay. So this is in reference to the development of the coffee bean. Essentially, a roast is sort of broken up into 3 stages. You've got stage 1 is the drying stage, where you look to drop the humidity down to sort of 4%, so you can then actually start to develop flavour, and you then sort of hit what's known as the Maillard reaction, which is the same reaction you get in baking bread, in roasting peanuts, you know, even with meat and onion. You know, it's that caramelisation, the browning. So that's stage 2, where you've got the browning stage, the development stage, and then stage 3 is the crack stage. And you have 2 cracks. The first crack is where the oils are forced out from the centre of the bean to the outside of the bean, and in sort of the first exothermic reaction. And then, if you keep roasting the beans darker and darker and darker and darker, you get another reaction where the last little bit of sort of oil and humidity is forced out again. And for each crack stage is actually where the cell walls of the beans are being broken. So
was
first
it
crack,
done as a sound originally?
yes, yeah. First crack is literally sort of a bit sound similar to popcorn. Second crack is a bit like sort of crunching paper, and it is very interesting. We don't take many of our coffees up to second crack. We do have one blend which goes up to second crack, and that really develops more sort of dark chocolate, sort of almost sort of burnt toast and vanilla. You know, people still really like that flavour. And a lot of other blends that we use are a lot lighter, so we're looking to bring sugar brownie notes, the toffees, the caramels, the lighter sides.
How many grades do you have in your roasting of the coffee?
Sorry, how many?
How many grades? Because in the old days I used to get coffee that was lightly roasted, medium roasted, or dark.
Yes.
Now they stopped the lightly. I used to buy it from H.I. Higgins, because in the 60s no one else sold coffee in London.
Yeah.
So how many grades do you have?
It now completely depends on the bean that we're roasting. Nearly every single bean has its own roast profile.
Yeah.
And we have data logging information which can sort of turn what's going on in the roaster to a graph on your screen, and you can see exactly what's happened inside the roaster. And then once we've got to a roast that gives our perfect taste, we then save that roast profile and always have it for reference.
I see.
And different origins, different altitudes give us completely different roast styles.
Is the graph of optimum taste when the sufficient oil comes out?
Ideally, yes.
Yeah. So you know exactly when that is on every
Yes.
bean that you roast?
Yes.
Right.
Because sometimes if it's over roasted, then that masks the flavour. I mean,
Of
with
course.
Kenya coffee, you know, if it's
Of
over roasted,
course.
you've lost it.
Yeah.
And the same with.
You can in coffee you can never add a flavour in roasting, but you can damage the flavour so easily. And for us, it's key to get the coffee to a stage that we express itself sort of in its best format, really. And whether that's a sort of a very lighter roast or a little bit darker to develop those sugars a little bit more, perhaps for an Indonesian coffee as opposed to a Kenyan coffee, we go very much by the flavours in the coffee, not how dark we want to take the roast.
I see.
And does that change from season to season in terms of what happens to being as it, you know, very much like our fruit seasons here, or are they seasons more consistent?
I mean, coffee's a very seasonal product. You can't really keep a bean more than a year, and in that year it'll change in how it tastes. But also throughout the year we'll have a different sort of origin at its best. So always through the year we've got sort of a different coffee tasting sort of its best in each time. So we're just sort of coming out of Central America. They've arrived. They're all tasting great now, and we're just about to start getting our Brazilian micro lots. And sort of in January we'll be getting our Burundian coffee, and that will come in at its freshest. So throughout the season we can have different blends tasting or different single origins tasting. They're very good.
So you're saying that that the coffee from each region ripens at a different time of year?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Very much so.
So when you say you sell the Ethiopian coffee, which I absolutely love, does that come from different estates throughout the year, but it always tastes equally good? I mean, and even...
It's a very good question. Because of the way that Ethiopia produce their coffee, which is they take a huge amount of care,
Yeah.
they dry it in a very specific way, it's a very stable coffee.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps in other countries, they don't have the same methods of drying and processing, so the coffee is less stable. So it'll be in its zone in the smaller amount of
The
time.
Guatemalan one, so I love your company, but I mean, I find that I can taste slight differences through the, but the
Yes.
Ethiopian one is just
Consistent,
you know,
absolutely.
and I
Yeah.
absolutely love it.
And that's
But
to do
I've
with
never figured
the
out
processing. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh no, no.
So you probably want to go on to tasting now, but maybe afterwards
Yes.
Claire can say what the parallels are or aren't with roasting cacao beans.
Yeah.
But maybe you probably want to do it.
Did everybody have a chance to taste the cocoa bean before we move on? I would like everyone to taste them. And yeah, so the cocoa beans are on the end. As if you taste them, we just crack the shell off in the palm of your hand.
First one was delicious, the second one wasn't so good.
So these ones are from our plantation in St. Lucia. They were roasted at our other site in Borough Market this morning, so they should be nice and fresh. And with this, it really starts to show cocoa is at its roots before the sugar was added. So as we're talking about the Mayans eating those and getting those really savoury flavours, and that's why we use cocoa a lot in cooking. It's amazing as a spice because it's just got those very savoury, nutty tastes in there. So sort of quite an unexpected taste. But yes, let's move on to our pairings for the evening. So. The first one we're going to just go through a little bit more slowly, just so everyone we're going to go through the tasting together, and we're going to do all the tasting together. But this one, just as you get your chocolate, if you just hold on to it, and the same with the coffee, if you just hold on to them, and then we'll taste them all together. So the chocolate that's coming around now, I'll tell you the glass as it comes around. So this is a 65% what we call a super milk. So the first things that we're going to taste today. They're both blends, so we're doing a blend of cocoa and a blend of coffee. Now, what I mean when I say blend is I mean the bean types aren't from one specific region. We blend lots of different beans from different places to get a specific flavour profile that we want to achieve. So this is done by the master roasters at Union. So this is the coffee that you're going to say Bright Note. I'll touch on that. And this is being done in our development kitchen. So this is one of our new chocolates. It's 65% super milk. So when I say super milk, what I mean is that for a milk chocolate there's a very high cocoa content. So if you look at your average sort of milk bar of chocolate, you really start at sort of the levels of 20% cocoa and go up to around about 40, whereas this is 65% cocoa, which is very high. When I talk about cocoa percentages, when you say 65, 70, that means the amount of cocoa, so that's cocoa mass and cocoa butter that's in the chocolate, and the rest of that in a milk chocolate is going to be split between milk and sugar, and in a dark chocolate is just going to be sugar. So that's the breakdown of what it means. So as this is a milk chocolate, because it's a 65%, the remaining 35% is split between milk and sugar, which means we actually have less sugar in this than your normal 70% chocolate.
So 15% milk and 20% sugar.
Yes. Yeah. So it's got a very low sugar content, this one. So when we taste chocolate and coffee, we taste with all of our senses. So the first thing to do is sort of take a look at your chocolate. We always like to snap the chocolate to make sure it has a good snap. That just means it's very well tempered, which means that the cocoa butter is set in a uniform way within the chocolate, so you should get a very nice even melt as you eat it. Then you want to smell it. So with this one, as it's a blend of different beans, what we're trying to achieve with this is, we've started off with sort of the least challenging chocolates of the evening. We just want to get really good cocoa notes coming through. And it's just sort of a very good, everyday chocolate, and it works really well for pairings. And the same with the Bright Note blend. This is blended with 3 different beans, all from South America. And the flavour profiles that we're just trying to get a very consistent flavour. So as you were saying, when you go to buy it, you know that it's guaranteed every time I buy it I'm going to get these same flavour profiles, and they're designed more for everyday drinking. Thank you very much. So if you'd like to taste the chocolate first, so if you take about half of it, if you haven't eaten it all already, so just let it melt on the mouth and let the flavours start to come through. And if you exhale, you should be able to get some more of the flavour notes coming through. There are the tasting trees on the table to help you guys pick out flavour notes. As I say, this one, hopefully you're all getting those really strong cocoa-y notes and just the gentle creaminess coming through from the milk and the chocolate. Yes?
Could you explain to me the difference between cocoa mass, cocoa butter and cocoa solid?
Yes, so when you have your beans on the table, the inside bit that you ate is called a nib, and effectively, when we make chocolate, we're breaking down that nib into its two main, we're grinding it down, and about 50% of that is the fat, which is the cocoa butter, and the other part is the solids, which you can imagine to be like a cocoa powder, almost.
Like a dry cake.
Exactly. So sometimes you may add additional cocoa butter into a bar of chocolate, and that will still attribute to its percentage, but it may mean that you end up with a much mellower bar of chocolate because essentially the cocoa butter has much less flavour than the...
So cocoa solids are butter or the cake?
cake.
Thank you.
So with your coffee, we put them in wine glasses today, and this is sort of a nice way to get everyone into the frame of mind of tasting the coffee. So you can do it very much in the same way as you would do with your wine. So really, if you give it a smell, you get the first flavours coming through. And yeah, this one's really got like nice cocoa-y, caramelly notes. And then, as you drink it, if you've ever been to wine tastings, you'll know it's the best way to get the flavours if you try and slurp it through your teeth just to get the aeration within the coffee to bring out those flavours. So if you'd like to taste your coffee, so this is the Bright Notes blend.
Yes. Yeah. Just be aware, obviously, it is very hot, so do sort of give it a good bit of aeration. And yeah, you don't want to burn the tip of your tongue because that's where all your taste sensors are. So just they give you that caveat. But we designed it to be, for us, a very drinkable sort of first approach to coffee. It's very creamy. It's very balanced. It's sort of caramel, roasted, nut driven, and on the back it's a little bit of that sort of vanilla sweetness, churned butter sweetness as well. So very approachable, balanced blend. Works very well as a filter coffee as you're drinking it now, but also exceptionally well in the espresso machine. So it's a very versatile coffee.
The espresso would taste good.
Yes, yes. In the espresso you get a lot more of that roasted peanut sweetness coming out. And a bit more of a sort of great acidity.
Yeah, so it's a blend of, the coffee is a blend of 3 different beans from South America, and the chocolate is from West Africa, a blend of different West African beans. And the reason for the blends is that you manage to achieve these really consistent flavour profiles that you don't necessarily get from single origins because of the seasonal changes in both cocoa and coffee. And then to taste them together, if you'd like to have the chocolate in your mouth and then take a sip of the coffee and just let the 2 flavours come together. We found with this one, when you take the coffee by itself, the vanilla notes are a bit more subtle, whereas with the chocolate they're a bit more prominent. And also the creaminess in the coffee, the cocoa really shines through, it's just a really nice pairing. Sort of nothing too complex, just a really good pairing together. I don't know if you guys are getting any flavour notes from it at all.
Okay, so we're very specific in the ratio. We always do the ratio of 60 grams to a litre of coffee. 60 to a litre, and we always do it on that basis. But it massively depends on your grind, how you grind it as well. So if you grind it very coarse, that will taste different. If you grind it very fine, so it's finding that balance. And all taste is very personal. So as long as you get it on that ratio, that sort of 60 to a litre. If you want to play with the grind and get some a bit more body by taking finer, or less body, lighter, tea-like by taking coarser, that's completely up to you.
So this is coarse or fine?
This is slightly on the lighter side.
With the darker roasts, they look more oily.
beans before you. What does that mean? Is it something to do with the roasting or the bean itself?
It's to do with the roasting. So in a light roast, the coffee oils sort of sit just under the actual sort of skin, the cells, just under the cells of the coffee bean. But on a dark roasted, those have been forced right out during second crack, and those oils are sitting on the surface. So if you do see a very oily bean, you know it's been taken the second crack. So that gives you some indication.
Lovely. What do you all think of that pairing? Good? It's just, it's your sort of, the coffee that you'd like to have. It's a very nice everyday coffee, and I think a very nice everyday chocolate as well. Both, you know, the best of their kind, but also just good for a simple, nothing too challenging, good pairing together.
I mean, it's not at all cloying. That's really good. Neither the chocolate nor clearly not the coffee, because the chocolate's not. That pairing, it's almost savoury in some respects.
Yeah.
I find that very pleasing.
Because of the very low overall sugar content of the pairing, you do get those savoury notes. And the chocolate we found in the development kitchen, when we've been tasting it, people who've been drinking tea during the day and people who've been drinking coffee get completely different flavour notes coming out from the chocolate. It's very, very versatile with it having the sort of creaminess on one side and the high cocoa content on the other side. It really depends what you drink it with as to which flavours come out to play.
With coffee, I think there's a lot of walnut.
A lot of walnut, yeah, you get the sort of nutty flavours. And that coffee has very strong walnut.
Yeah, yeah.
The nut flavour in it is the walnut flavour.
The nut flavour you're getting is from the Brazilian components. Brazilian coffee and the group that we work with called the FAF group, Fazenda Ambiental Fortaleza. They are, for a coffee sort of group, they are quite low in altitude. So about 1,200 meters. So for coffee, low. And that means you have less fruit and you have more sort of roasted peanut sweetness and more sort of caramel notes. The higher you go, the more the more fruit notes you get, and then depending on what you do with the processing will depend on what type of fruit you get.
Is this the strength you would recommend making it?
Yeah, it comes back to this. So this is this ratio of 60 grams to a litre.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you're doing half of that, you half the ratio. Quarter of that, quarter the ratio.
Sure.
So it's always that nice balance.
Yeah. So this is the strength you would recommend that we drink this
absolutely.
coffee,
Yes.
which is very delicate.
Very
Yes.
delicate.
It's sort of almost like a tea in a way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It really sort of brings out those light flavours. I think so often you have coffee and it's like motor oil. You know, it's sort of cloying and it's bitter and it's gritty. And this really brings out that inherent sweetness of the coffee. For the coffee industry, for Union, we really want people to sort of see beyond the roast and see the coffee, see the origins, see the farmers.
Yeah.
That's a very important part of the roast.
So the second pairing that we're going to move on to now is moving from the least challenging to one of the most challenging pairings that we're going to do today. So we're sort of throwing you in slightly deep end, and we're going to a 100% cocoa. So I don't know if any of you have ever had 100%. I assume a few of you probably have. 100%. Yeah. So with this one, we're doing a pairing of 100% cocoa. So there's no added sugar, and actually legally we can't call it chocolate because it needs to have at least 1% sugar to be able to call it chocolate. So this is a cocoa bar. With our 100%, we so when we make chocolate, we use this machine, a conching machine. And the conching time really changes the flavours that you get through from the chocolate. So with some of our more punchy chocolates, we have much shorter conching times to really bring out those fruity notes. With our 100%, we have much longer conching times because we want to mellow the chocolate out. We don't want to sort of blow your heads off with the cocoa. So the 100% that you're going to taste, so again, if you just hold on to it for a minute as it comes round. This is from St. Lucia. So in St. Lucia, we have our own plantation, but we also work with all the island growers. So this is a collection of cocoa all from St. Lucia from our island growers. And we take the cocoa off them in once it's ripened, and we carry out the fermentation and drying on our plantation. So we do all the processing to develop the flavour within it. And we actually work with all of the farmers in St. Lucia now. So we're the only place that you can get St. Lucian chocolate from. As I say, this is 100%, so when you're taking it, just bear that in mind and take a small amount. If you go through the same processes as you did before, so really with this, there's a lot more intricate flavours than the first one, so you really want to make sure you're doing the good smell, letting it melt in your mouth and really tasting the flavours that are in it. We'll go through the flavour notes, but I'm interested to see what you guys get from it first. So.
It's about the crunchy.
Yeah.
This bit crunchy, this bit texture.
Yeah.
Here we go. Over there.
So as it's going around, just to sort of elaborate on the conching, so the beans that you tried, inside those we have the nibs, and to turn that into chocolate, we need to basically melt the cocoa butter down, and we do it in this machine behind me, which is called a conch, and it's basically 2 stone rollers, and as they roll round, basically the friction melts that cocoa butter inside the chocolate, and it starts to become a liquid. And then we basically reduce the particle size of the remaining solids down to a really fine texture so that you can't detect it on your tongue. So if anyone wants to have a look at the conch later, it's here, it's churning away, it's making some, I think it's from Trinidad, the cocoa that's in it at the moment, yeah. So on our sites we change what cocoa we're roasting and making on site all the time.
So there's no heat in that, and that's just...
No, the light's just so you can sort of see what's going on. Yeah, the friction all comes from the wood. We turn it up a bit faster than this, just gets very noisy, so it's turned down at the moment. So the coffee that we're pairing with this one is the one that you've tasted right the way through now. So this is the finished coffee, so you've tasted the bean, you've tasted the tea, and now this is the coffee, so it's from Los Lajones in Panama. And the reason we've chosen to pair it with the 100% is because this uses a different, so when I was referring to the different methods of processing, this is a natural method. So when this is picked from the tree, it's actually left fully in the cherry and dried in the sun for about 20 to 30 days. And so you really get the natural sweetness from the fruit going into that coffee. So it's naturally a very sweet coffee. So first of all, we'll go discuss the chocolate. I'm just interested to see what flavours you guys are picking out from the chocolate. We'll do the same with the coffee, and then we'll pair them together and see what differences we get. So what are you guys picking out from the from that St. Lucian 100%?
It reminds me of the rock hard Mexican chocolate.
Mexican chocolate?
That's grated for mole.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so this is amazing if you make a chili or something to add those real like depth of flavour. Quite astringent, yeah. So for me this one has quite a peppery taste to it. A bit peppery, and we sort of, it's almost a bit like an olive oil that's been left with pepper inside it to sort of get those and slightly grassy flavours coming through as well. Any other flavours? What are you guys getting from the, how do you think about the 100%? Yeah, it's surprisingly creamy, and that is to do with the long conching time that really brings out the creaminess. And as I was saying, we add extra cocoa butter into this.
The Mexican doesn't have that creaminess.
Oh no, that's much more that's powerful stuff. A Mexican. Normally about 5 to 10%. So if you'd all like to swill and taste your coffee. Thanks very much. So it's quite a complex coffee. It's much more complex than the first coffee that we tasted, and this one will be one that varies seasonally. And I get lots of red fruit notes coming through, and very clean acidity. So you get the sort of strawberry, cherry, cranberry acidity coming through with the coffee. And that natural sweetness from the natural processing method.
Very sweet and very flowery.
Floral.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting coffee because a lot of people find that it is sort of they don't want or they don't expect to get a strawberry or a very strong red fruit note in their coffee. And often sort of people say, I couldn't drink a whole cup of it. But there are those that are very interested in this coffee because it's so different. So it's kind of a coffee that sort of split a lot of the public consumers.
So this is
those that love it, those that sort of struggle with it. But it is very interesting because of that, and it does change significantly through the season. And that also is sort of makes it quite interesting.
So this is from Panama?
Yes, Panama, a region called Boquete.
So it's a single...
Yes, single origin and yeah, single state. And the estate, the farm, it's called Los Lajones. And we work very closely with the farmer. Yeah, so he sort of developed these for us, and we're lucky enough to be the only people in the UK to have this specific micro-lot.
When you first drink it, you think, oh, it's a bit weak.
Yeah.
Then the flavours, the other flavours come through.
Again, it's this whole thing of very light roast. You know, you again traditionally expect a very deep, heavy body, but all of these are much on the lighter side. And it's a new way of looking at coffee. It is trying to think of coffee a little bit more like you would think of a wine. And it's getting people to think about terroir, the taste of the origin, the taste of the process, and not just, oh, I want my hit of coffee.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to try them both together, so again, a small bit of chocolate and take the coffee in. So we think the fruits slightly change to more autumnal fruits when you have them together, but you do still get that real tanginess coming through from the berries and the acidity from the chocolate pairing together, so it's quite a tangy combination when they're paired up.
If the coffee was twice as strong, would that totally change the characteristics of the coffee?
Yes.
What would you lose?
You would lose the subtleties. You would lose a lot of fruit. You'd end up with a lot of sugar. You just get some sugar browning.
Why wouldn't you double the characteristics?
Because double the strength affects the water to coffee ratio, what's known as the total dissolved solids, and that will have an effect on the dryness of your mouth. That will literally pucker your mouth, and you get a very drying sensation, which stops you from being able to perceive those lighter, brighter notes.
Yeah, so you'll see as when they're paired together, they really, the flavours that you get from both of them completely change. So they say over here you get much more of the base notes of the chocolate coming through, and you lose some of those top fruity notes from the coffee.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit of a crowd splitter, that one. I'm not sure what you all think of it as a pairing. These guys over here quite like it.
Yeah.
It's quite challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
It's a
quite,
challenging.
It's quite high. The end effect is quite high in acidity, and I do understand what Glyn is saying about the weight differential. I think that's what you're.
The weight, exactly.
Because the weight of 100% coffee is it really is mouth filling and
Yeah.
so on. And then okay, so the coffee is kind of refreshing, but it doesn't match it, and they can't quite. But I do understand that some people enjoy that sort of sharp, fruity aspect.
Yeah, it's very
tangy. The weight is kind of. I'm with Glyn on that one. I think that the weight is kind of the differential.
Lots of people with coffee, that mouthfeel, that viscosity. We traditionally drink a very viscous. A lot of people either drink espresso or French press, and the French press has body because it's actually got. Dissolved solids and that oil bits in it, and the espresso is sort of it's your example of you really it's sort of 3 or 4 times stronger in its ratio, so you do get these incredible intensities and mouthfeels. And again, this does sort of you have to kind of rewire the way in which you think of the coffee. But yeah, there are those that often love the umami, the sensation, those viscous mouthfeels, perhaps. Sort of shy away from such a light, bright sort of fruity coffee. But this is what makes coffee so interesting. You know, there are so many different permutations, and what makes it work so well with chocolate.
With the chocolate, yeah.
A truth that one hesitates to acknowledge is that as you get older, sensitivity decreases.
Yeah.
And so stronger flavors become more appealing because they come up to the level of what one experienced at an earlier age.
Well, that's why it's so difficult to get children to eat food that's very strong in flavour, because they have so many more taste sensations, so they pick up all the flavours that die out, unfortunately. But yeah, that's why everyone will be turning to our 100%. That'll really get the flavour coming through. So the third pairing we're going to do this evening is we're going to look at an origin with an origin. So both of these are from Guatemala. So the cocoa bean we're using is actually a new chocolate for us. So it's coming out, well, I think it's just been made, so hopefully it will come out within the next few months. So it's a Mayan red. So these beans are from a supply, one of our new suppliers called Choco. It was getting quite well known in the chocolate world at the moment, and they're one of the first cocoas that actually source beans based on their specific genotype. So we have 3 main bean types, but these are all from the exact same genotype. So they're all sort of called a Honduran Trinitario genotype, and it means you get like a very specific flavour coming through. So all of the flavour profiles come through.
Did you say any sauce for the brown colour?
So this is a 70% we're going on to with the chocolate, and predominantly, predominantly the beans come from Guatemala, but a few of them come from Honduras as well. They're a mixture together. But because of the specific bean type, you do get very strong flavours coming through. And it's one of the first times with cocoa we're really starting to look into individual gene types in the beans and how that influences the flavour. So it's a sort of new industry that cocoa's really starting to explore. So that chocolate should be on its way around to you now.
Is there a parallel in coffee of this kind of exploration of genotypes and a complex web of hardly, you know, is it easy or difficult to determine what the genotype is and what an original varietal might have been like?
Yeah, I mean, we've got within the industry, we've got some very specific sort of variety tree. And again, very much just as there is with chocolate, there is fascination with variety.
Yeah.
And different varieties add different flavours to the coffee. So,
in the way that they're both grown, sort of a lot of coffee originally was grown in the wild, as with cocoa, so you get a lot of mixture with the genes from the beginning. So really now starting to look into that in a bit more detail and exploring within the 3 bean types or the 2 bean types in coffee, specifics within those and smaller varietals that sit within them.
When you, with these 2, you've got very different conching times. What happens between 150 and 8 hours?
Yeah, so this one, the one you're about to taste, has a much shorter conching time, and you might detect that in the texture. You're going to get a slightly different texture, so that sort of creaminess, it's a bit less sort of creamy, this one. And with the, as we go on conching, basically all those astringent flavours, as the oxygen goes through the chocolate, they get lifted off, and the more mellow flavours have a chance to shine through. So with the 100%, we have to have a very, well, we don't have to, but we choose to have a very long conch in order that the more mellow flavours can come out and some of the astringent flavours are played down. Whereas with this one, we've added sugar to it, so that helps to mellow out some of the flavours. And with this, it's such a powerful, punchy, fruity chocolate that we really don't want to over-conch it. We want to really highlight those fruity flavours that are in the chocolate. So I don't know, have you all had a chance to taste the Mayan red? And the coffee is going to come around now. So what flavour notes are you all getting from the Mayan red? So you should notice the difference.
lovely creamy.
It smells of the hillsides to me. It smells like oregano.
Smells like oregano. One thing I should mention as well is that everyone's tasting experience, because you've all, we're at the end of the day, some of you might have been drinking lots of coffee or eating strong flavoured foods during your day. Your taste buds will be quite tired, so everyone will pick out different flavours as they go through. So
That's my favourite one. Thank you. Thank you.
So the coffee that's coming around is also from Guatemala. So one of the really big differences in cocoa and coffee is the altitudes at which they grow. So cocoa, really, you can't get it to grow above 1,000 feet, and you're lucky if you can. Whereas coffee doesn't really like to start growing until 1,000 feet. So these are both grown in the same region, but this one's actually grown at a much higher altitude than the coffee is. So the soil and the terroir is going to be very different. So the flavours that are going to be influencing the coffee, even though it's the same region, are going to be very different from the flavours that are going to influence the cocoa. So the snap is dependent. So when we finish our chocolate, we go through a process called tempering. So the cocoa butter that is in the chocolate, that natural fat, we need to set it by tempering it. So the more cocoa butter that is in the chocolate is going to influence the snap as well. So quite often you'll find some chocolates with very low levels of cocoa butter are a bit softer. So that 100%, it's got very high levels of cocoa butter in it because there's nothing else added to it, so it will have that quite strong snap.
But this one was almost soft. I mean, there was no snap to it at all. So, but it's delicious chocolate.
So where does it come from, this chocolate?
So the chocolate is a Mayan red bean type, so predominantly it's grown in Guatemala, the same as the coffee that we're tasting. Yeah, Guatemala and Honduras.
So when you temper chocolate, you develop the flavour characteristics.
So the tempering of the chocolate is purely to do with the finish. So the cocoa butter is a fat, and as it sets, it forms a crystal structure. So there's actually 7 different types of potential crystals that can form as the chocolate starts to set. And if we were to take a bowl of chocolate and leave it out at room temperature, as the temperature of it slowly drops, different crystals start to form. And if you imagine those to be different shapes, basically they don't form a solid structure. So there's no structure to the chocolate, which is why it's a bit softer, and you often get the white stripes. Yeah, so that's called a bloom, and that's just the fat coming to the surface.
So how do you avoid bloom form?
So by tempering it, yeah. So by controlling the temperature, we can control which crystal forms. So by rapidly dropping the temperature, so we use the marble surface or the tempering machine, we can drop the temperature right down to the ideal temperature for forming the beta crystals, which is the one that we're aiming to form.
So the trick is in lowering the temperature really quickly.
The trick is, lowering it and the movement to agitate the crystals to encourage them to form.
Beta crystals that prevent blooms.
It's the beta crystals are a stable structure, so they fit together. So when you have a mixture of crystals, that's when you get the bloom, because they're not fitting together to make any solid structure. So if you imagine them all to be different shaped building blocks, if you have 7 different shaped building blocks, and I asked you to build a bridge, you'd have no chance. Whereas if I gave the person next to you building blocks that were all rectangles, they'd make a bridge in no time. So it's the same thing, they all slot together, which is why you get that shiny surface, because they're all slotted together.
So if you use really good quality chocolate cooking, you're as likely to get bloom if it's not tempered.
Yeah, so the only time you need to temper chocolate is when you're having it as a solid. So in a filling, you don't need to temper it. And if you were using it just for cooking, it's going to melt, so it doesn't matter if it's tempered or not. But
if you're using it as a topping over something.
If you're using it as a solid topping, you'll need to temper it in order to ensure it has that nice clean snap.
Sorry if that's been so much
question. No.
But you know when you get those patisserie chefs who do those wonderful, say, I don't know, those shiny, glossy, fabulous.
So that's to do. That's to do with the surface on which the chocolate is set on. So if we really polish our mould,
Yeah.
the shininess as the chocolate sets is going to. If you have moulds that are to start with, exactly as you put it on, it's going to set with that really nice shine on. Whereas if you have a mould that's matte, you're not going to get as much of the shine coming through.
So your chocolate is all tempered?
Yes. So all chocolate that you will buy as a bar of solid chocolate will be tempered.
But if you then take it home, like Ruby says, so you take it home and melt it, and then wanted to make your own chocolates at home,
You'll need to re-temper it. Yeah.
So as soon as you remelt it, you destroy
unless you can, if you're very sneaky, melt it very, very, very carefully to make sure it doesn't go above a certain temperature. But it is quite difficult to achieve that. You can effectively heat up some of it to a higher temperature and keep the rest solid, and then use the solid chocolate to drop the temperature back down, and the seed of crystals that's in the solid chocolate will then go into the melted chocolate. So that's the best way to melt chocolate at home. But yeah, you won't get the nice shine. And also, if you make chocolates at home and you're using a mould, if you don't temper your chocolate, what happens if it's tempered as it sets, it slightly contracts as the crystals slot together, which means you can drop it out of any mould. Whereas if it's not tempered, it just stays the same shape, so it will get stuck in the mould, and you'll find it very difficult to get it out. Which is a common problem that people have in their kitchens at home. So yes, so this pairing. What do you all think of this one?
Love it. I think it's works very well.
The best one?
Yeah, the best one.
So it's interesting, you guys. So for this one, both of the coffee and the chocolate, they're both quite strong characters.
To me, they complement so well. Whereas the last one I thought was quite an extreme, and I didn't like it. I think that complements itself very well.
I agree.
Thank you.
The coffee, for us, it's a very high altitude coffee, so no less than 1,700 meters, and usually has quite a bright acidity. And when I tasted the chocolate with it, what blew me away was actually how acidic the chocolate was. And you get, when you eat the chocolate, you get the grape acidity in your cheeks. You get a very dry cheek sensation. And actually, the coffee next to it wasn't half as acidic as I was expecting, and actually they worked really well together, and they sort of bring out each other's sort of more dynamic sides.
Yes, I think the chocolate really brings out the sort of almost slightly burnt toffee caramelly notes in the coffee that are a bit more mild to start off with because the acidity is more dominant. But I think when you pair it with the chocolate, you get some of those more sort of toffee-ish flavours coming through.
The first, the sort of top notes of the chocolate, first, that it comes in with a lot of fruit
with
at
a
the start.
Powerful
and when
punch.
I tasted it on its own, it's got from the plant and apricot at the start.
Yeah.
When I drank the chocolate coffee through it, it just kept its fruit going for longer. It was like it sort of did a little roll, you know, and it lengthened the fruit of the chocolate a lot.
So, as I say, both of these come from the same region, so it's almost the very complementary flavours coming from the same soil, so they're both grown in the same region, so you can see how those flavours really complement each other, just the altitude difference. Wonderful. So the final pairing that we're going to do it slightly differently. So the first three have been done a balance of coffee and chocolate together, but the chocolate maybe has slightly led the route of the pairing. So we sort of started with 100% and thought, what can we pair that with? And started with the Mayan red and thought, what might that pair with? Whereas this final pairing, we actually started with the coffee because it's a very interesting coffee. So it's very, very, very delicate. So I know you've been saying that the coffees that you've had so far have been quite delicate and tea-like. We'll bring this last coffee round. So this time we're going to taste the coffee first and see what flavour notes we pick out from the coffee, and then we're going to taste it. And for this one, I've actually done a filled chocolate. So we're going right to the other end, we're going to a white chocolate. And we're doing chocolate, coffee and tea all together. So we've got a ganache that's infused with a tea, a white chocolate and the coffee coming round now. So the coffee, I don't know if it's the same Ethiopian coffee that you drink. I don't know which Ethiopian. So this is an Ethiopian coffee.
Yeah, so this is from the Yirgacheffe region of Ethiopia, which is very, very floral driven, and it's got so much flavour going on. It's very tea-like, very, very tea-like. We've very proudly served it out, and we've had complaints because people say, "What you've given me a coffee that tastes of tea? I want a coffee that tastes of coffee." And it really is. It is very sort of almost Earl Grey-like. So bergamot notes, floral notes, a little bit of cardamom maybe in there, cumin, a little bit of lemongrass. I don't know, maybe some white chocolate as well. And it's a very light, bright coffee. And when you get it, do swill it around in the glass a little bit. I know it's quite hot, but you'll really get those aromatics coming through.
So when we were doing the pairing, I have to confess I am a bit more of a tea drinker than a coffee drinker. So when I tasted this coffee, I was like, we have to use this coffee in the pairing. It's like a tea. I love it. So we're desperate to use it, but the chocolates, if you taste it, do overwhelm some of these filter coffees because they are so delicate. So really, all the dark chocolates that we had were just far too dominant for this. So we decided to pick out some of those more floral white chocolate notes in there. So what we've done is we've actually done a very mild infusion. So when you do infusions with when we do infusions with chocolate and tea to make a ganache, we like to do a cold infusion, so that when you brew tea, if you leave it to brew too long, you get those very tannin-y flavours. So for the truffle that we're going to pair with this, we've done a cold infusion, so we've used Earl Grey tea that's been left in the cream overnight, and then that cream is then used to make a ganache. So you get a very delicate tea flavour coming through rather than any of the tannins. So hopefully if you familiarise yourself with the coffee, hopefully you'll all see those nice tea notes coming through. It's very, very delicate.
So whereas we've had natural coffees with lots of fruit, and these are fully washed. So these are, as soon as they've been picked and had the cherry removed, they're put in water, and lots of water movements sort of gone over them and cleaned all of the mucilage, the sugar off. So what's incredible about this is an example of Ethiopian terroir, because there's no fruit, there's no coffee cherry that's given it this flavour. There's no sort of coffee mucilage that's given this flavour. It is the inherent terroir of the Yirgacheffe region. So it's a fascinating coffee, and this is where it all started.
Do you have cafes now yourself where you can try your coffees? Do you have your own cafes?
We don't have our own cafes, but we work with, in London, we work with the Taylor Street Baristas. So they're a sort of a chain that you may or may not know. We also work with Harrison Hall in London as well. And there are various independents that we also work with. You guys, you can taste the coffee here.
Yeah.
So we are not a coffee shop, we are a roastery, and we often, as we're doing here, sort of do bespoke things for the different customers that we're working with. And it's a pleasure because different people want different things, and it forces you to sort of think outside the box.
So with this, as you have it with the chocolate, those tea flavours should be really accentuated. So they are there, but obviously once you have it with the extra boost of the Earl Grey, they pair really nicely together. And it's the creaminess of the white chocolate does really complement the sort of tea-like flavours in this coffee. So our white chocolate, normally white chocolate, some people snuff it a bit, can be very sweet. We have a very high cocoa content in our white chocolate. It's actually 36% cocoa, which is higher than a lot of milk chocolates. And the reason why it's white is because it's just got the cocoa butter. So it's cocoa butter with the milk and sugar. So that's the reason why white chocolate is white. None of those sort of cocoa strong flavours. Yeah, that's why people sort of often, you know, but. It does, white chocolate does take on pairings really nicely, especially teas and fruits. You get the pairings coming through really nicely.
So it's got much, because of the cocoa, it's got much more of the bergamot than the burgundy the old way.
Yeah, so we use gin teas. So it's got, so yeah, we thought the gin tea worked nicely because you get very bergamoty, almost sometimes a bit jasmine-y from the coffee. So the coffee's got slightly jasmine-y, bergamoty flavours that we thought worked well with the gin tea flavour profile, because it is quite a bergamoty tea.
Very definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said that was Earl Grey tea, as you said. It tastes more fruit.
Yeah. Because of the way we infuse it, you don't get any of the tea tannins coming through, so you just get the pure sort of essence of the flavour, because you don't actually ever warm it up in the process. It's just left cold for 24 hours to just delicately infuse the cream.
Yes.
So what do you guys think of this pairing together? I think it really brings out the tea. Too sweet for you? I think it really brings out the tea flavours in the coffee. So, strange sentence to say, but
This tastes like the tea that we had originally. It's got that similar sort of...
oh, so you can relate it back to that cascara cherry tea, which is interesting because it's been fully washed, so it's spent the least time with the cherry. Yeah.
And again, it goes back to it's that area. This is it's called a garden coffee. So most people who produce these literally have their own small little plot. I don't know, of 100 trees, and we buy from the Congo Cooperative. So it's a mill that works with maybe 200 or 300. I think it's more than that. It's almost 500 little sort of small-time producers, and they all put their little lot of coffee towards the Congo Cooperative, and then they do the washing and the processing. A lot of these guys do not have the infrastructure, you know, to do it themselves. So combined together, then they get more out of it, and you just such an interesting coffee, fascinating.
Claire, how do you get that? The cacao beans when you wash off the mucilage, I mean, it's always essential, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's one of the interesting things. There's a real difference in the importance of the fermentation. For the cocoa, it really is crucial to developing the flavour of the cocoa. If you don't ferment it, you never get any of the sugars going into the cocoa bean to begin with. Whereas the coffee, as this demonstrates, you can get really interesting flavours coming through from it, even if you fully wash it. So all of the mucilage has been completely washed off. Whereas the cocoa will always be left with its pulp on to ferment for around about 5 to 7 days. And without that, there would be, you know, if you look at them, they're completely different colour. They have no cocoa-y taste. So yeah, it's sort of which it makes it all even more mystifying how it was discovered, because with coffee you might imagine it was something that was discovered later, the added bonus of the fermentation, whereas with cocoa it's very important from the beginning.
Is this grown at a higher altitude?
Yeah, it's all up. Yeah.
Because, I mean, how does it compare to Hara, in your opinion?
Hara used to be an incredible flavour profile, but in the Ethiopian sort of quest to sort of improve it and push it further, they've kind of tipped it over the edge, and it's sort of become almost too boozy, too
it's not so fruit
crazy. Whereas yes, this is a lot softer in flavour, and they've really standardised the way in which Ethiopian coffee is produced. So each different area has got its own very specific flavour profile. And it's very different to Hara, and I don't know if today you can get those lovely clean Haras that you could have got, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
Because in the past, Harar was supposed to be the best coffee, wasn't it?
Absolutely,
But
yes.
I find it a bit too much, a bit
Yes.
gothic.
Yes, we've literally got our Harar arrive this week, and I've sort of just been test roasting it and tasting it today, and it's quite a wild coffee. It's sort of blueberry, it's fruit, it's cocoa. It's a very interesting sort of wild coffee. Whereas this is much more refined, much cleaner, much softer and subtle.
An easier coffee.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, as somebody that's affected by caffeine, and I should be partying until tomorrow lunchtime, can you give any advice about decaffeinated, whether you choose decaffeinated, what to look for?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes, we do produce decaf, and I mean there are various different processes. There's mountain water decaf, CO2 decaf, spring water decaf, and nowadays most decafs are pretty good for what they do. Mexican has sort of it, because of the way it's processed, it tends to have like a slight spicy ginger note to it. The Colombians are doing their sort of ethanol, they're using sugar to decaf it, and that's a very, very sweet decaf. So absolutely there are decafs out there. They are also developing and bringing on varieties that have next to no caffeine in them. So we're working with a group in Colombia that are developing this variety called Eugeenoides. And Eugeenoides has sort of 0.01% caffeine, less than a decaf bean. But at the moment they're only producing it a bag at a time. So we're a little bit away from making that a viable option, but you can see that that's where producers go. It's varieties that have low yield, and where do they get those from? They got those kinds of varieties from Ethiopia, oddly enough.
Yeah, so especially with products that we make, like the teas, so we use just the shells to make very delicate teas, so you get the sort of bit of a cocoa hit, so you feel like you've had some chocolate, but without actually having had any of the calories of having the chocolates. But yeah, they're very full of antioxidants. The reason why you feel so happy when you eat chocolate is because it makes your brain release endorphins and small levels of dopamine. So dopamine is when you fall in love, it's that sort of butterfly feeling, so that's why people connect so strongly. So if they want to feel happy, go for the really dark chocolate, 100%.
Say that again about dopamine.
It's the chemical you release when you fall in love.
But you're saying
the butterflies in the tummy.
I know, yeah, but what were you saying about if you eat chocolate?
Yeah, so chocolate makes your brain release very small amounts of dopamine. So if you have very high cocoa content, so if you have something like an 80%, something with a lot of cocoa in it, you get all the antioxidants, but you also get all those feel-good factors. So it actually, as you eat it, your brain releases endorphins. So that's why it makes you feel very happy. That's why the experience of eating chocolate actually makes you feel very happy.
That's why it's my sister's choice. That's why I'm saying.
Sorry, and of course when you have something with a very high cocoa content, you don't get the sort of sugar drop afterwards. So if you have something with a very high sugar content, you'll still sort of feel good, but that's because of a sugar rush. Whereas you have something with very high cocoa content, you get the feel good without that massive sugar crash at the end of it. So that's why we're all about putting more cocoa in things, so that it's actually, you are getting all the goodness out of the cocoa bean and experiencing all the benefits that it brings to you. And obviously, we do add a bit of sugar in there just to fit the palate. Yeah, so we do loads of things with the cocoa bean. So we do use it in cooking. You can actually, if you have a cafetiere at home, one of my favourite things to do is get the beans, just gently crush them, and then use them as you would in a coffee, in a cafetiere as a coffee, and it makes this really sort of. Well, it's a sort of cocoa drink. So if you crush the cocoa beans up and put it in, I use a cafetiere at home. So just put it in the bottom as you would brew it like like if you were using it for coffee, and you get this really rich cocoa drink, but just made purely from the cocoa beans. And as we started to talk about earlier, cocoa does have its origins as a drink. So it was used for years and years without any sugar added by the Mayans and the Aztecs. Sugar wasn't added to chocolate until it came across to Europe anyway, so it was always a savoury, energy-boosting, feel-good drink. So that's one of my favourite ways to have cocoa.
How do you crush them roughly?
Yeah, literally just rolling pin in a bag, break them up with your. As you see, they crush quite easily in your hand. So.
But can you buy things?
Yeah, you can buy the beans. Or you can actually buy just the nibs. So with the shell taken off. But the shell does add like a bit of depth of flavour. I like having it with the shell as well because it does add a bit of depth of flavour.
These ones has got the shell.
Yeah, so they've got the little shell.
So the drink was started just with water.
The drink, yeah, just literally just with water.
When did it change to being a milky drink that we drink?
It as it came across to Europe. So originally it was a drink, sometimes even with corn to thicken it. So maize crushed down with the cocoa and poured with this water to make this frothy drink. And then really, when the Aztecs were conquered by the Spanish, at the time cocoa was being used as a currency. So really, that's why the Spanish saw it as this commodity, not really as something to eat. It really didn't suit their palate. They just saw it as this commodity that they could use for money and getting more power. But at the same time, they were also discovering sugar, and when the two of them went together, and it really only became a sort of milky drink as it went through Europe. Just to meet those sort of European taste for sugar that we've got developed. Yes, it has actually. So in your goodie bags, as you leave, you have a little bag. So Union have put some coffee in there for you guys, which Ollie can tell you about. But we've also put a really special bar of chocolate that we've made.
Rabbit out of the hat.
Yes,
handmade this actually.
As I was learning more about coffee, as I said, I have drunk coffee, but not as much as before we started working with Union. It's really opened my eyes to all the intricacies of coffee and all the delicate flavours you can get. And so one thing we started playing with, Emma, who I work with, is our couverture. And one of the things we've been looking at is what else can we put in the conch at the same time as the cocoa beans. So one thing we've started to look at is putting coffee beans into the conch and grinding them down with the cocoa beans, so we can make a bar of chocolate that has coffee in it, and instead of having to add coffee in bits at the end or add a flavouring in, we can actually put in the coffee beans. So the bar that I've made is using amazing beans from South America, Cienega beans that have really red, fruity, curranty notes. And in the coffee, we've used this Rwandan coffee that has sort of orangey flavours running through it, spiced orange flavours. So we sort of created a bit of a Christmassy blend bar of chocolate for you guys to enjoy. So it's just, we've only just made it for the event.
And so you written down what beans are each?
Yeah, so it's written on the back. So it's it's the Rwandan coffee beans and the Cienega cocoa bean. Yeah, Colombian.
Just before I thank everybody, brilliant time. I should mention, if you've got any questions about chocolate in cookery, our very own Jamie Southern compiled the Hotel Chocolat cookery book. Was it the first one, the current one? I'm not quite sure. But
say that again, sorry.
Was it the first? There are two books, aren't there?
It's just a revised version of the first one.
A revised version, okay, but you're responsible.
And I think
what connection?
A few of Guild members here have contributed to it. So there's Jane and Mary, Sarah,
and Glyn.
Glyn, yes.
Gosh, well, we clearly came to the right place. That's been fascinating. I know it's raised more questions even than we've had a chance to ask and answer. I'm sure you'll all be very happy for Guild members to contact you with questions. Is that right? And we can give your contact details and the write-up and so on and so forth. Utterly fascinating, and I'm so grateful for the amazing lengths you've all gone to since the idea was just mooted, and even creating a chocolate bar specially for us. I mean, that's brilliant. But it's all been utterly fascinating. Just can't quite take it all in. Thank you so much for all your hard work. Thank you for your hospitality. It's been very generous, and I've learned a lot. There's a lot of missed, but I've learned a lot, and look forward to learning a heck of a lot more in future. Thank you.